So with that, I want to hand over to E. But I want to hear from you, E. I mean, you started Flutterwave, you started Andela. You're the only African to start 2 technology unicorns. Why go from technology startup to city building?
Thank you very much for having me here. Thank you to my brother Jay-Z for having me here. When we were building Andela, there were quite a number of experiences. And one of the biggest experiences, I tell the story with laughter, but at the time it wasn't that funny, was how many times we had to move buildings in Lagos. I remember the first office, we were sharing offices with CC Hub at one time. Then we moved office when we grew a little bigger. And I remember being scammed. We thought we were moving to a building. It turned out the building wasn't real, or the person who leased it to us wasn't the one who owned it. Anyway, let's just say that building fell through. We had to go to a temporary location, then find another location. Why am I telling this story? The biggest limitation to the things that we managed to build at Andela and Flutterwave, and I would even argue with our 1.7 billion tech ecosystem in Nigeria, $5 billion tech ecosystem across the continent, is the lack of infrastructure. Till this very day, you will be hard pressed. I think there's only one facility in Lagos that can take 2,100 developers. That's the largest facility that I know of. Most facilities are way under capacity. Most of these facilities are also far away from where people can afford to live. The talent lives almost an hour away on a good day, maybe 3 hours on a bad day, if there's traffic, from where their offices are. And you can go on and on and on. And the reality of a lot of the ecosystems that we're building, I keep saying that these ecosystems have been built in spite of infrastructure. There is nowhere else you would go in the world where you have a $1.7 billion industry without an address. But that is exactly the reality we have been living in there. Now, the reality is Africa suffers, and I'll end on this note, because I want to keep it short and pithy. We suffer from what I call a this before that problem. So one of the reasons why Andela and Flutterwave worked was because Andela came before Flutterwave. You can imagine if you built a payments gateway but didn't have developers that could build on the APIs, right? And that's why there are many attempts at trying to build something similar like Flutterwave that failed before Flutterwave emerged and succeeded. And that was because you didn't have the developer ecosystem that could actually leverage that. I think it's the same thing with infrastructure. We are sitting on a technology ecosystem that lacks depth because it doesn't have an address. There's nowhere it stays. So a lot of the economies of talent scale aren't accruing. We don't have spaces for experiments. We can't solve problems on a smaller scale. And I think that's the defining challenge for the African tech ecosystem for the next decade. How does it build its roots downwards, right? So that it can continue to bear fruits upward.
That economies of talent point brings me to B Buie, who was Chief Strategy Officer at Andela. And I don't think it's a coincidence that a few of us have Andela backgrounds on this panel.
Well engineered.
But you have spent so much of your career, whether it was group managing director at ThoughtWorks, to now the opportunity to lead Google Search in Africa, building and developing these talent economies. Like, why was that important for you?
Thank you. I'll start off with a very quick anecdotal story on Andela as well. I was at ThoughtWorks and managing Africa and LATAM, and really pressed and challenged for finding talent in order for us to be able to grow and scale. And we were very open to wherever we could find talent. And we were introduced to Andela and we were told they've got talent. And so we made a call, and it might have been when the building fell through because it was a call where video was on and they were in an apartment and there was a leak.
Yeah.
And the leak, you remember this? And the leak was causing interruption because it was causing lack of focus on our call because it was potentially getting to the rise of the bucket that was capturing the leak. But I was taken because this was a group of just phenomenal entrepreneurs who had seen what felt like truly a cumbersome challenge and said, no, we will find and we will create the talent across the continent of Africa that will begin to solve and to build. And I'm very passionate about sort of how we create these cultures of innovation. And I think Andela was definitely a great catalyst for this. Listen, we have a continent that will be where the global youth will live. And I think how it is we try and capture the opportunity is going to require innovation, and it's going to require being able to create the spaces for innovation. And I think how we think about cities and how we think about how, I think I read a statistic where since 1990, we now have 7,700 cities. That's double where we were in the 1990s. And this is where transformation happens, whether it is social, cultural, and economic. And so when we think about talent and how talent plays a role in this, it's really in what E was saying, where if we don't have the ability to convene, I think we struggled and saw this struggle with COVID. Whereas with Andela, we had about, at the time I was leaving, 800 software engineers on the continent of Africa, dispersed across 10 countries, but dealing with truly infrastructure problems around their ability to be online, whether it was for learning or whether it was for actually building and executing with teams. So how do we create the convening spaces that allow us to be able to not only learn from each other, but then also to be able to learn with each other? I'll give an example. Google created these Google developer spaces. I think there was one in Lagos as well. And the intention there was, how do we bring not only the engineers, how do we bring startups, how do we bring the VCs, how do we bring them into one space? So that while, I don't know if you know this, there's about 750,000 software engineers from a survey we did in 2022 on the continent of Africa. Only 40% of them actually work for African companies. And so what is that space that allows for that data scientist that's working remotely for a company in the UK to still be able to, in the evening, run a masterclass that allows for other data scientists to really learn applied ways of taking what they've learned and being able to apply it to some of the local companies they're working for. So bringing the convening of these and then apply it in innovation as a founder or innovation as a colleague. And then be able to pitch it to someone that is also within that community and able to fund it. We've seen examples of this. I think the Silicon Valley one was a great one. There's Generation F in France. There's Two Trees that sort of was the impetus for what is now Dumbo in New York. There's some that are even solving for urban planning. I believe there's NREP, which is a Scandinavian entity. So I think there's just really a lot of opportunities and a lot of proof points that when you are able to create the infrastructure that allows for the convening of technologists, ideators, innovators, startups, and funders, only good things come of it.
It seems like we're hitting on this early theme of agglomeration of talent, and that the agglomeration of talent, when it was in Silicon Valley, it was physical. Mm-hmm. But maybe African Silicon Valley, that physicality can be redefined. But going back to sort of the early theme on motivation, I want to ask you, Daniel, a little bit about Wasoko. I mean, Wasoko is now the largest B2B e-commerce company in Africa. It's a very logistics-heavy business and largely based on mainland Africa. But here you are co-founding Silicon Zanzibar and Fumba Town on the island of Zanzibar. Why?
Thank you. Excited to be here. after lunch spot, so try to keep things energetic and interesting. So thank you, Justin. As mentioned, had experience over 8 years now building up this e-commerce company across now 6 countries in mostly kind of East and Central Africa. And it's been a very demanding but also rewarding journey, given that we do deal with all the logistics, all the on-ground. We have over 1,000 people who work for the company across all the different offices. I think all of us, the reason why we're here and what we're all trying to do is figure out how do we increase the talent output, the talent density, and collaboration across the continent. And I think, cities have always been the drivers of talent, both in terms of bringing talent together, but then also in terms of upskilling talent throughout history. And, I think really where we're at now in terms of not just the tech ecosystem, but the larger African continental opportunity is really figuring out how do we unlock the potential of the raw talent that we all know is there, but is right now inhibited from realizing their full potential. I think in large part because of a lot of the artificial barriers that exist. Ian and I were having lunch earlier, and we talked about the ridiculous situation where for a Nigerian software developer, it's easier for them to get a visa to go work for a tech company in Canada than it is for them to get a visa to work for a tech company in Kenya. And this just doesn't make sense. I think in any world, if we're trying to build up the talent and build up the productivity, build up the output of tech companies in Africa, if they are inhibited from being able to get the best talent from all the corners of the continent, then how are we going to build world-class companies? You can't have a tech company based in 1 out of the 54 countries that's trying to be Pan-African, like ourselves or, like Flutterwave or anyone else, where, right now, according to the rules and the regulations of, a lot of these different countries, they say that, hey, 95, 98, maybe even 99+% of your staff in this office have to be citizens of our country. How is that going to work? How are we going to build out successful Pan-African companies if we have those kinds of policies? So I think, there's a lot of opportunities to figure out how do we reduce these barriers, not just for trade and for goods, which is a lot of what the African Continental Free Trade Agreement is doing. But I think it really starts with the people, it starts with the talent. How do we reduce the barriers between, business people who want to be able to scout out opportunities in neighboring countries or in other parts of the continent, young university graduates who, see an opportunity in a neighboring country to work for a firm there. If you don't have that reduction in barriers when it comes to visas, both for visits, for work, for study, then we're really not going to be able to unlock this potential. And so to speak to the Silicon Zanzibar point, which I'm going to talk about a little bit later, I think with Mark Letter, really the vision is, can we create an environment where we do have the best policies for attracting the best and brightest from across Africa and beyond to come be on the continent and build here, collaborate here in a obviously very attractive environment, the sunny beaches, in the Indian Ocean, but that is still very much rooted in the East African region and the broader continent, and really work with the strategic autonomy that they have as initially actually a separate country from before they merged and became Tanzania, and be able to work with the government there, attract institutions like the first ever campus of the Indian Institute of Technology outside of India that has just opened in Zanzibar, and attract companies like ourselves, as Wasoko and others, to really start to build out that hub, benefit from an approach that is truly kind of Pan-African and open to the best and brightest coming in, and ultimately use that to build up an ecosystem that can hopefully inspire and kind of drive this same kind of momentum and openness in other African jurisdictions as well.
I find it fascinating how often tech entrepreneurs end up becoming experts on governance and almost like lobbyists on the continent. And I want to put a pin on that because I know B Buie has had some phenomenally interesting experiences here. And of course, he spends a lot of time with government officials as well, making sure that the Itana project has the governance framework to work. But before I get there, I want to turn over to Leonard. Professor Wakan is not just the James Madison Professor of Politics at Princeton. He was my professor when I was 22 or 21 as a junior there. And what I think in the city space we might not recognize as often is like Leonard is probably the preeminent African political economist in the world. He won the 2023 Kiel Institute Award for Global Economy, which is a precursor for many for the Nobel. And, and without touting his harm too much, it's like when I meet tenured professors, I don't typically find them starting universities throughout the continent. And so to finalize this sort of motivation piece, Leonard, would you mind talking a little bit about why it was important for you to start the African School of Economics?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thanks for the opportunity. So, three things. So first, I think there is no Silicon Valley without Stanford University. There is no major innovation without a major research university at the center. So when I got hired by Yale University in '95, my first initiative was to set up a research center in Benin that grew very fast into an university, the African School of Economics. And, you know, I mean, if you go to African School of Economics in Benin, it looks like a primary school. You know, the infrastructure is very basic. But from that place, I placed 45 students into top PhD program in the US. And many others working at the IMF, World Bank, MTN, governments across Africa. So it was an experiment. And because I really believe in research universities. And based on the success of the African School of Economics, I've decided last year not only to expand regionally, you know, to 25 countries across Africa, around 3 hubs, Zanzibar, Nigeria, and hopefully South Africa, and each campus having 4 to 6 countries under it. I also expanding from economics and finance to engineering, to science, and to business. And my motivation for this is that if you need a pipeline for tech companies, you shouldn't look any further from engineering school, from school that teach computer science and so on. But something which is all very important is development is not just about technology. Development is about the social infrastructure of a country. So economics, sociology, history, psychology are all very important. And, we need to know who we are. We need to know the intricacies of African societies so that we can develop technology that's adequate, that we can develop technology that solve our problems. It might be built on existing technology, but the adaptation of this is something that require local institutions. So my motivation for setting up the African School of Economics is really because I believe that as an academics, we are not just there to publish, we have to make social impact. And also, I also believe that universities are not just a place where you learn your tricks to get a job. Universities is a social project. Is a place where you think on how best to fix the issues that your country, your community face, and that's why really I'm highly motivated by what I've been doing for the past 28 years in setting up the African School of Economics and the institutes around it.
And Leonard, you didn't start your career in academia in a standard way. Would you mind sharing a little bit about that part of your story?
Yeah. So when I gave the prize in Germany, I said that miracle happened when crazy determination meets opportunities. You know, I was born in a family of subsistence farmers. I was political activist since I was in middle school, believe it or not. And I ended up being arrested for organizing a demonstration against the government. And I was arrested. And first of all, I stayed in hiding for 5 years because I wouldn't want to leave the country. I was still organizing student movement here and there. But then in the end, there was an amnesty. I came back. And then I organized another a much bigger uprising in 85. And this time I was not lucky. I was arrested. And then it was hell, you know. I'm not going to go through the details. But I managed to escape and went to Lagos. And in Lagos, I went to Côte d'Ivoire because there were rumors that I was going to be kidnapped in Lagos. So Red Cross took me to Abidjan. From Abidjan, I went to Canada. And in Canada, basically, I was able to bypass any undergraduate education because basically
Lived life.
no. So my life experience helped me. You know, if you look at my CV, there is no undergraduate degree. So it's not a mistake. I don't have one. You know, my first degree was a master's. Then, if that's not enough, I finished my PhD in less than 3 years, as opposed to 6. So, but, you know, it just shows you, and I'm giving this example to show that, as you all mentioned, you know, we need to create opportunities in Africa. Because it cannot be the case that the only way I could reveal myself is by being unlucky to be arrested and have to flee the continent and go elsewhere. You know, there should be a place where people like me will be able to develop their talent and contribute directly to a continent. So anyway, it has not been easy, but it just, you know, strengthened my determination to do something, for the continent. Yeah, thank you.
Really well said. And I love that quote that when miracles happen, when determination meets opportunity. Reminds me of the Andela slogan, brilliance is evenly distributed, but opportunity is not. And it seems like increasingly to create those opportunities, bringing it back to the piece around regulation, you can't exist completely outside of a governance framework. That you have to work with government to improve the rules for you to operate in. And with that, E, can you talk a little bit about what you're doing and how you're working with the government of Nigeria, along with, of course, Lukman, to help create better business rules for entrepreneurs?
Sure. Lukman should get all the credit here because he's the one who really knows how to work with them. I just come up with the ideas and he makes them happen somehow. But back to the point you were making, actually I have a slightly different view, which is actually that you can build a lot of interesting things at a very small scale. But if you want it to have broad societal impact, then you need to work with government to scale your impact. And one of the challenges for our community over the last 10 years is I feel like we've been doing a lot of demo projects. You know, everyone says, oh, he's built 2 unicorns. And I'm like, yeah, they're very small companies compared to the market opportunity. If you had functioning government systems, right? I like to say, Andela would be IITs, which are easily $1 trillion enterprise, right? Flutterwave would be ADHA, right? Which is easily $1 trillion enterprise. So a lot of what we've done the last 10 years is try to fill government's lack of capacity by building businesses to fill social gaps. One of my favorite mentors says, we build market caps on social gaps, right? Now, I think we want to transcend that, right? We've done that for 10 years and it's great. But a lot of the work that we've had to do now is to figure out how do we build these businesses into the fabric of government so that there's social equality and there is social progression for people. And so that work has taken me to Abuja quite a number of times in multiple different capacities. has gotten me on many lists, a couple no-fly lists, erroneously or not. So that seems to be a recurring theme. But most importantly, has given us the opportunity to shape government policy in a real way. Starting with, 2020 during COVID, woke up one day to a call from an old teacher friend of mine that the labor unions were about to make it illegal for anybody to use technology to do financial services. And we had to go to Parliament and fight that to a standstill. To 2022, when we realized that we were being overregulated, and we had to go to work with the presidency, despite quite a number of people in the ecosystem's political opposition to the government at the time, to basically create what is now called the Nigerian Startup Act. Writing new regulation for ride sharing in Lagos, which ended up building a $500 million company today called Move. And most recently kind of leading the lobby efforts to get a member of our community into the ministerial role, and multiple other interesting things that have now become possible, even in a very tricky place like Nigeria. And what I realized, for me, three very important things I've taken away, from my own experiences. I think the first thing is people underestimate the extent to which policy creates markets, right? Well-written policy is incredible for creating brand new markets that, can change everything for a society, for a community, can help us scale impact. I think the second thing is you have to engage across the board, right? You can't engage just the people you like, or engage or complain against the people you hate. You have to work side by side with government officials of all stripes. You have to be very, very bipartisan. And that is mostly what has gotten us our win. And I think the third thing is just recognizing that the person at the other end of the table, is a human being who has aspirations for their country, no matter what you think. And is willing to work with you if you give them the benefit of doubt. And so that has been our experience.
Daniel, when we had drinks a couple nights ago at the opening event, I was struck by the fact that you started talking to the waiter in Kenyan Rwanda. And when I learned more, not only I thought my Swahili was decent, your Swahili is better than mine. You speak French, Arabic, and I'm sure a number of languages that I didn't uncover in the course of a couple drinks. But why is that important to you? I mean, we've been speaking throughout the conference about engaging local communities. Could that be somewhat related?
Absolutely. I mean, I will say I do like learning languages. It's originally what brought me to the continent, even the circumstances that inspired the idea that became Wasoko, which is I was living in Egypt at the time, learning Arabic, and got to know some of the shopkeepers in the neighborhood where I was staying, and realized that they had these challenges with ordering and restocking for their stores, and also having an interest in technology and being a software developer myself, I kind of married that opportunity and brought it together. But I think it's a good, example or metaphor, I think, for, in that case, literally speaking someone's language opens your eyes to circumstances, to challenges that you wouldn't otherwise know exist. I think this is a huge problem if you think about, and I'll give, from my personal example, I grew up in California. I'm a software developer by background. I have a lot of friends who live and work in Silicon Valley. And a lot of them are doing what I think are like pretty stupid things. They're working for, Uber for dog walking, or, just some, email click-through marketing company that's optimizing the conversion rate by, 0.2% more. And sure, in a market like the US, you can make a lot of money doing that when you improve your ad click-through rates by 0.2%. But, the reality is that if we really want to solve real problems and unlock, human potential and really improve well-being for people who can benefit from it the most, you have to be solving real problems in places that are outside of these, kind of Silicon Valley bubbles. And so I think, thank you. But I think, so a big part of that, and so back to kind of, I guess, myself personally, one, I have put in the effort in the years that I've been in the region to learn the local languages as best I can, of our local customers, so that, when I go and I visit them and I can ask them, how's business going? What are the challenges you're facing? How are service, all these things. I think that's just on a baseline important and helpful from a business perspective. But I think also, when it comes to building connections, building ties, language in a literal sense helps to open up new opportunities. But I think it also demonstrates that respect and that exchange of culture as well, that I think is fundamentally needed if we are going to be able to build big markets, to build integrated markets and systems. And so, when I look at things, to me, it comes back to, how can we build that unified market, across the continent, starting with the exchange of talent and then also reducing the barriers for goods and services. And this doesn't have to come at the cost of, losing one's culture, losing one's identity. I think we've seen, that, in the continent of Europe, despite thousands of years of war and violence and terrible things that they've done to each other, they've managed to, create a unified market where, someone from Romania can go and take a job in Germany or in Spain, no restrictions, no discrimination whatsoever. They can, if they get accepted for the job, move the next day, find an apartment and start moving, no problems. And, what do we have to do here to be able to get to that level of mobility, because that has unlocked and raised millions of people out of poverty. If you look at the income differences historically between, a poorer country like Romania and a richer one like Germany. And so, if that can be done, in a place that, 80 years ago was literally tearing itself apart, in war and violence, and, now is a very peaceful, prospering region. I don't see any reason why a continent that is even richer in terms of its resources, its talent, its potential, its people, why we can't do the same here too. So that's what I'm excited to be a part of supporting, and hopefully we can all do it together.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Speaking to that Pan-African angle, Wambui, you have had a number of Pan-African roles, and you have to make these sort of hard decisions on how to do resource allocation across different markets, different regions, different geographies. Like what's most important for you when you think about where to invest?
Sure. So one thing I will say, it's apropos that this conference is happening, the summit is happening in Kigali. In the case of Andela, when we were looking at where this was when Andela was more of a learning organization versus a double-sided marketplace that it has since evolved into. But I think a lot of the panelists have spoken to this. How do we make it possible to convene the best talent in the same location and remove some of that friction? And at the time that I joined, we were in Kenya, Nigeria to start, then in Kenya, and then really looking at where else. But the investment required to go to any one city was not going to be sustainable for the model. And so then there was this conversation about, well, how do we, and mind you, we weren't as far along with remote as we are today. So back then it was, how do we do learning that we really required facilitated learning? How do we do that across 54 countries and do it as fast as possible? And so we were testing out hub and spoke models. Let's do something in South Africa. Do we think we're ready for Egypt? And I just was very impressed with the conversations we had with RDB and how quickly we propelled into a Pan-African conversation. If learning must happen in one location, irrespective of where the individual may be from, how might we fund that and make a Pan-African hub in Kigali that would allow for learners from wherever they came from to come here, still always making sure that we had the space and the accessibility for Rwandese learners as well. And then how might we then be able to give them the knowledge, give them the experience, and then be able to deploy them back to wherever it was they came from. And it was a very, very impressive in terms of first conversation to a public-private partnership Unfortunately, markets started to turn and the model that Andela was shifted, and so we weren't able to fully execute on that. But that was an example of where I think the government has been very intentional in, when you think about where learners were already existing in Rwanda in terms of ALU and Carnegie Mellon and University of Rwanda, and sort of the curriculum around really building for software engineering talent. But then also the Kigali Innovation Center. And so a lot of the Pan-African conversation is sort of where is it most easily enabled in a way that allows for some of that friction to be reduced, to then be able to bring and extend where that impact can be driven from. I'm from Kenya, and so certainly I think it is easy to be in Silicon Savannah and assume that that's what it's like for everybody else, where they're creating their silicon, name the fauna or the location. But I think it's really in thinking about where are the pockets that are opening up those opportunities, and how can we think about them in more of a Pan-African sense? Because despite the fact that I think it was 7,700 cities, it may be easier to accelerate what's possible if we sort of are able to create some very meaningful hubs. So that's one of the ways of thinking about it from a Pan-African perspective.
And Leonard, you were at this inflection point for ASC where the opportunity to grow very rapidly, and you do have 7,700 cities to choose from. How do you go about selecting?
Yeah, that's great.
Which city you want to build in?
I think it's about opportunities. For instance, already we are present in Nigeria, and we will be present more forcefully in Zanzibar. So Silicon Zanzibar.
Wow, that was big, Daniel.
Yeah, and then we are going to be present in South Africa. We are developing relationships in Kenya, for instance, particularly in agriculture, in Zambia. I think Gaius mentioned that today. So I think I'll be growing a few more, gray hair for the next few months. But it's super exciting. But I need to stress three things very quickly. So the first one is that in all those campuses, there will be frontier research centers in biotech and agriculture, in computer science. We also have in geoscience and mining. And I have contacted colleagues at Princeton University, in other US universities, so that they partner with those centers as soon as they are being created. Because I think I have to insist one more time on the fact that for cities to grow at the pace we want, to be sustainable, we need to be at the frontier of technology. And today, this is possible. Despite all the trouble I've been through, I went to the US, and I can identify 4 or 5 areas of research that I've conducted in Benin, in all places. That's at the frontier of economics, political science, and history. So this is possible because it had been done. I think it's something very important to insist on. And, the second point here is that those who are interested in working with us, please get in touch with me. Let's work out something, one form or another, because at this stage, what is needed is scale. If the idea is there and it's good, have been proven, sustainability depends on the scale. And we have 54 countries, we have cities charter city being set up. So the opportunities are there. We just need to work something out so that it can be sustained. So, and I cannot thank enough CCI and E and Daniel and Gaius, all those colleagues I have been working with on this. And so it's really, 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 really exciting. And hopefully within the next few months, we'll have some big news to share. Thank you.
Universities are also very expensive. And how are you thinking about the financing side?
That's a tough one. So, so let me say, I build universities in a way that's very different from most universities. Typically, universities start with infrastructure, big building. And then later on, you find out, you think about what, and then you recruit. I'm doing the opposite. For the next 2 years, we'll be focusing on renovating some places that we lease or we have been given. And then we recruit top faculty. And it helps to have Nigeria, to have Zanzibar, to have South Africa. So those are attractive places to go to. So we'll be able to recruit faculty. And, so the budget for recruiting faculty, for better or worse, faculty now they are not very expensive, So all due respect to the faculty in the room, so the professor in the room. So yeah, I think with a very decent budget of few millions, for instance, it's possible to get started, even at a larger scale. And then after a year, when you have high enrollment, which is possible given the scale that we are working with, then things become much, much easier. So in fact, I don't think funding should be the main challenge at this stage, but I might be wrong. So I hope everyone in the room will help prove me right, So anyway, so anyone who has suggestion ideas, please share. But anyway, so that's where we are. Yeah.
I want to touch on something Wambui mentioned about the experience, working and building in Rwanda. And I know, Daniel, not too long ago, you opened in Rwanda. How has that experience been?
Well, we've had a fantastic time working in Rwanda as well. Been operating here for a number of years, but we actually just expanded our presence, started serving customers out of DRC as well, just across the border by enlarging our hub here. So look, I mean, I think it's very clear that policy does make a difference, as we're saying, right? And you only have to look at the economic transformation of this country over the past 30 years from where they came from to see that very clearly. And I think it just goes to show that businesses really do react to market opportunities that are created by having a facilitated business environment, by having clear policy, by having a level playing field, which I think is something that is very, very under-focused in other markets. And especially if you want to attract international investment, you want to attract multinational companies, really making sure that you have this consistent, fair, and reasonable policy environment, and that you are innovating and recognizing that especially in this day and age, you are competing with the other markets, the other countries around you. And a company, especially a multinational, is deciding, hey, do we put $10 million into expanding our presence here? Or do we put $10 million into expanding our presence here? And I think that's something that, what is the value proposition of your jurisdiction is something that is not enough on the minds of a lot of the policymakers and civil servants that are in the region. The power dynamic is often very much in the opposite way. What are you going to do for us coming here? And the reality is that's not how I think flourishing businesses and ecosystems are built. And so it is really great to see. I think Rwanda RDB in particular leading the charge. Has really set the bar, set the standard for investment development. On the continent. And so we've been, very, very happy with, how the millions of dollars that we put into investment here in Rwanda has turned out, and expect to put a lot more, and want to see, many other countries emulate the example as well.
Thanks, Daniel. And if we could just end with one final question. I think, you've always impressed me with how forward-looking you are. And bringing it back to our topic of today, Africa's Silicon Valley. Like, what does African Silicon Valley look like 10 years from now?
I think one of the things that I feel we don't talk about enough in Africa's Silicon Valley, and I bristle a little bit at the Silicon Valley attachment, because we're Africa. We don't need to be Silicon Valley. We don't have any silicon anything in Nigeria, for sure. We're too arrogant to do that. But, one of the things that I think we got to figure out as a continent is we are now the world's largest workforce in an age of AI, in a period of incredible supply constraints of just about everything, with an aging world, quite literally. The median age in Africa is going to be
19.
19. In the US, it's closer to 40, and so on and so forth. So we got to start leveraging technology to define our place in the world. It can no longer just be a question of, oh, what you people are doing in Africa. It has to be a question of how Africa is defining what happens for the rest of the world. And I think the critical questions are going to be man-machine symbiosis. It's a beautiful book on that by Licklider from the 1970s. And alongside those questions, what I call the African in the loop. What does an African in the loop and African on the loop look like in an age of AI? Is going to be a question of productivity. How can we increase global productivity? Because we have this incredible workforce and knowledge barriers to productivity are dropping very fast because of artificial intelligence. And ultimately, it's going to be about how do we build what I call jugaad economies, right? So no one cares enough about Africa to give us a Marshall Plan. So that's not going to happen. We're never going to have enough money to invest in infrastructure we need. We're never going to have enough money to be able to get everything we want built the way Europe did, and even to some extent the way Asia did, right? What we would have to depend on is ourselves and our ability to be productive. And so in that kind of world, how do we build infrastructure that's just in time? How do we build talent faster than a 16-year school system would allow us to? How do we build new kinds of markets that are governed by the internet rather than governments that don't have capacity? And ultimately, how do we make all of these things that we build sustainable at scale? So that's what I'm thinking about these days.
And with that, thank you so much. We're out of time.